Welcome to Music Ed Tech Talk, a podcast exploring music, education, technology, and the intersections between them, with a special focus on the productive and creative process. I'm your host, Robby Burns.
Joining me again today is Daniel Spreadbury, the product marketing manager of Dorico. He's here to talk all about Dorico 4 for desktop and Dorico 2 for iPad.
Daniel, I should say thanks for joining me again. I'll do a little, I'll do a more formal introduction at the top of the recording. But, as we were just saying before we hit the record button, you and the Dorico team have had a very, very busy, would you say, what has it been, maybe 6 months since we last spoke?
Yeah, I think we spoke just literally days before the iPad version was released back in July last year. And, we've been very, very busy cranking not only on we did a couple of updates to the iPad version in the autumn, but also working, of course, on Steinberg licensing, which several of us in the Dorico team, I mean, obviously lots of people across Steinberg have been involved in that project, but, a few of the members of the Dorico team have been really quite involved in that project. Plus, of course, in January we released Dorico 4, which was pretty much our biggest ever release, and just a couple of short weeks after that we released a new version of Dorico for iPad that kind of brings it up to parity with many of the Dorico 4 features. And we're sort of ploughing on, more updates to both Dorico 4 and Dorico for iPad coming imminently. So yeah, it's a busy time.
Now I'm excited to get the perspective, being behind the scenes of creating these tools, but as someone who is simply on the other end, like someone who's using them to get their work done, I see kind of like this, maybe this conversation, at least in my mind, is sort of a continuation of a narrative that kind of goes back to that iPad discussion back in the summer, which is that, one of the things that can happen when you build an application on another platform using similar code is then you can sort of, as releases happen on both mobile and desktop, they can sort of inform each other and even coincide with one another. And I think I like the rapid release of Dorico 4 for desktop and then a Dorico 2 update for iPad within months of the original. It seems like that has proven to be the case. Am I right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously both the iPad version and the desktop version are built from the same code base, and that's obviously very important for us because we're a small team, and so if we had to maintain two totally separate code bases for the iPad version and the desktop version, that really would make it impossible for us to do the iPad version, basically. So we've definitely done our best to leverage the work that we've done on one for the other, and that works in both directions. We've obviously brought some things from the iPad version that otherwise probably wouldn't have been on our plans for Dorico 4 into the desktop version. And likewise, then the nice thing about that is that because they're built off the same code, once we've shipped the Windows and Mac version of Dorico 4, we can very quickly turn around and release an iPad version because, of course, as we've been working on the desktop version, the iPad version, we've been building it every day, and, we haven't necessarily been able to kind of turn around and fix any issues that arise in the iPad version as a result of work on the desktop version as we go. But, once we were able to kind of sit down, and the handful of us who tend to do the work on the iPad version kind of were able to look at it and say, oh yeah, well actually we're pretty close, and then we were able to do it pretty swiftly. I mean, my ambition was that we would have released Dorico for iPad 2 on the same day that we released Dorico 4 for macOS and Windows. That was the plan. We didn't quite get there, but as you saw, it was only 3 weeks later that we were able to release it. So we were not too far behind.
I still put the story together in my head. When Dorico 4 came out, it was actually a lot of my favorite features of Dorico 4 were things that had come to the iPad version. And so I was seeing that benefit, and then when Dorico 2 came out so soon afterwards, it became clear to me, I thought to myself, this is very exciting, because it's like, okay, it's on the one hand, it would seem like your attention is split between multiple different things, but actually it really appears like development is speeding up, ramping up.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously on one level, yes, it is kind of split. Like right now we're trying to do some iPad specific stuff. Obviously in Dorico for iPad 2, there are a few iPad specific things. Obviously we've streamlined the onboarding process to try to make it easier for people to get started. And we've also added some very basic, but it's a little step in the direction of Apple Pencil support in Read View. You can now annotate with a highlighter and with a sort of fixed nib pen and so on, which is very, very baby steps, but it is a step nevertheless in the direction of trying to, make better use of the specific capabilities of the platform. And we're hopefully relatively soon, not in the very next update, but hopefully in the one coming, not too long from now, we will hopefully have open in place support, and then right behind that we'll hopefully have some iCloud support. So we are definitely doing the work on the iPad version specifically, but realistically it has to kind of trail along behind the desktop version, or kind of in the wake of the desktop version at least, just because obviously the economics, I mean, one of the things that you and I spoke about years ago about doing an iPad version of Dorico is the economics are difficult, and that's still true to an extent, because obviously the just even if we have a really tremendously successful subscription business on the iPad version, realistically that's not going to generate the same kind of money that the desktop version does. That's just a fact of the sort of the different economic model that desktop software and mobile software kind of has. So we can't maybe make it the lead platform, but we can certainly do our best to stop it falling behind. And hopefully what folks will see in the coming sort of updates, and again, we're also able to, of course, leverage the technology of our colleagues who built Cubasis, and they've obviously been continuing to update Cubasis. Have been 2 or 3 significant-ish updates to Cubasis since we released Dorico for iPad in the summer, so we'll be able to take advantage of the improved performance and so on of their audio engine in Dorico for iPad in future versions as well. So it all has to kind of move along inch by inch on each platform, but we remain committed to both having a great desktop app and also having a great iPad app as well.
Do you want to kind of talk about some maybe some broad top level maybe some new features or design decisions that have gone into these 2 updates that will grab people, or do you care if I just go straight into the weeds on some of the things you just mentioned?
Go straight into the weeds, Robby. I think we live in the weeds, right?
I certainly do. I mean, there's and it's funny because when you care about how software is designed and you are trying to also deal with very, very specific kinds of problems that you're solving, which in my case, I mean, even from music educator to another music educator, there might be very, very different things someone is trying to accomplish in notation software. Like this past school year, I'm just making lots of practice study guides where I'm taking concert literature and then writing everybody's part for every instrument and trying to sometimes do this with very, very minimal planning time. So to me, it's the friction points that I run into and the things similarly that are really helping me in these updates are the things that I think about, but they might not necessarily be the things that everyone is thinking about, or the masses are thinking about, or even that you're the most proud of. But anyway, all right, I'll just grab onto a couple things you said, because you mentioned 2 things that in our last conversation I said were my number one wish list items for the iPad version, which is you said open in place, and then you said iCloud, and I guess those are 2 separate things in terms of what kinds of development tools Apple gives you. Is that right?
Yeah, so obviously the one, you can't do iCloud support without open in place, but open in place does not itself mean that you necessarily then have iCloud support, because of course Apple provide really rich APIs, and of course ideally you would build your entire application only using their APIs, and if you did, they have a wonderful class called UI document, for example, that is the way that they recommend that you make your document format, so that then it's very amenable to iCloud, because iCloud has many clever features, but among them are things like partial syncing of just the bits of the file that have changed in the session, and the ability to coordinate changes in the file even if you're using them on the same app on 2 different machines and so on. Now, we won't necessarily be able to tackle all of those things, because obviously we have not designed Dorico's document format from the beginning with iCloud in mind. It really wasn't something that we thought about at all, to be honest, because we knew we were building a cross-platform app, and that wasn't really going to be a thing that was something that we were thinking about at that time. Maybe that was a mistake in retrospect, but there's challenges with then you can't really use those APIs on Windows. So that's obviously a challenge to having a cross-platform app, and having a cross-platform app where the file format isn't cross-platform isn't really a cross-platform app, so that sort of ties our hands in some degree. But yeah, what we sort of have in mind really is that obviously open in place is important, because right now in Dorico for iPad, as you pointed out when we were talking about it last year and in the write-ups that you've done about it, it means that anytime you open a project from email or from Dropbox or from having it shared to you from your Mac or whatever it might be, then it's going to be copied into Dorico for iPad's own document container. And so that is a copy of that document. If you change that document, even if it lives in your Dropbox, the one that you're editing inside Dorico for iPad isn't going to update the one in your Dropbox or wherever it may have come from. So at that point, you then have to share it back to that application in order to replace the one that was there or make a new version of it, whatever it might be. And that's obviously a bit of a bummer, and it's inconvenient. So open in place allows us to basically, I mean, what it amounts to really is Apple providing a security model so that you can say, hey, for this kind of document, I want to be able to, I'm going to be a good citizen and I'm not going to cause any problems. So I want to have access to that document when it's in this other location, and then it's allowed to write it back there, and the OS kind of handles, again, the coordination of that file going back to the original privileged location that it lives in. So that's step one, and even without iCloud support, that will be a valuable improvement, because it will mean that, for example, if you do open something from iCloud Drive or you open something from Dropbox, even without there being genuine iCloud support where that file is then automatically synced to another machine, if it's in iCloud Drive, it will get synced by the iCloud mechanism that is independent from Dorico. And if it's in Dropbox, it'll get synced by the Dropbox app. So you'll still get a lot of the benefits of having a cloud-enabled workflow, but without specifically iCloud support. And that will have a couple of downsides. The downsides are obviously that, all those amazing things that you see when Apple demonstrate, using Pages on the iPad and Pages on the Mac, and all that handoff and all that sort of continuity stuff that they do, that you can't really do without using Apple's own APIs top to bottom. So when it comes to actual iCloud support, it probably won't be the case that, let's say you have a project open on your Mac and you have a project open on your iPad and you make some changes on the iPad version, and then without you even lifting a finger, those changes spontaneously appear in Dorico on your Mac. That is almost certainly not how it will work. But obviously the danger of not doing anything is that you could have that document open on your Mac and you could have that document open on your iPad. They're both looking at the same iCloud Drive folder, for example, and you save the file in one place and that overwrites the entire file, losing the changes you made on the other device, and vice versa. So we will at least need to implement what Apple calls file coordination, which is the means that that basically another app that is accessing the same file is kind of notified of changes to the file format and so on. So we will have to implement some kind of solution there, but it won't be as beautiful and as seamless as the use cases that you see demonstrated in Apple's own apps. But as I say, I think it'll be a pretty significant step forward, given the limitations that we're working with as a cross-platform app. And we're still at the early stages of all this, so there's a little bit of a way to go. But that's absolutely what we're intending to do, and I think it will make the iPad version that bit more useful to people who are working cross-platform, and of course especially to people who are using Dorico on both platforms.
Yeah, I can't wait to see it in action. It's definitely the way that I work. My iPad is, to some extent, I use it for its strengths, but then there are times where it is sort of like the laptop replacement, in which case it's nice to have everything sort of just be this window into the same data. I guess the distinction that you made between iCloud and open in place, which is interesting to me because I'm learning things about this as you're talking. I guess it seems, correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like from what you're saying that Apple has this whole like file provider system where if a file is opened on the iPad version of Dorico from anywhere local to the device or in your Dropbox or in your Google Drive or something, that system all sort of takes place using the native interface of their Files app, much like the Finder does on the Mac side of things. So you could technically, it sounds like, by implementing the open in place, I could put a Dorico file on my Mac, I could put it in my iCloud Drive folder, and then open it in place on the iPad version of Dorico. But it seems like maybe the iCloud stuff that you're going to bake in is just some additional APIs from Apple that sort of help to make specifically using iCloud as the cloud syncing service like a little bit smoother and more seamless, maybe like a little bit less susceptible to like conflicting files. Am I reading that right?
Yeah. Yes, that's exactly right. Because of course, if you use Apple's UI document stuff and iCloud support top to bottom, then conflicts are resolved automatically. That's the beautiful thing about that whole system is that if you've got a numbers spreadsheet and you're editing in cell A1 over here and E5 over there, you can edit those two values and iCloud will take care of the deltas. But it's a bit different when you're not using that whole sort of model top to bottom. So, as I say, at the very least, our goal is to provide a good enough experience that it will offer that you need to do something, basically. So if you edit that document in a way that's going to lead to the potential of a conflict or some kind of data loss, if you overwrite a version that's got some changes from somewhere else or what have you, it will warn you and give you options about what to do. It won't prevent you from doing that, and it won't automatically resolve those conflicts, but the idea is that it should at least be able to prevent you from unwittingly losing data because you're relying on iCloud. And as I say, because Apple do a great job of really selling people on how these things work, and of course, from the user's point of view, it would be ideal if we never had to worry about this stuff and that everything just worked the way that Apple's demos always make it look like it works. And obviously it would be possible for us to do that if we were willing to switch Dorico over to being basically only working in the Apple ecosystem. But it's not really feasible for us to do that. That would be cutting off just less than half of our user base, and that's not something we're likely to do. But it should nevertheless give you a decent experience that will prevent you from making a mistake that you can't easily get out of.
Sure, that's so interesting. Yeah, because I guess I had assumed until this moment that simply by act of putting a document inside of an iCloud Drive file system that Apple is handling some of that stuff just through the nature of it being in iCloud Drive, but it sounds like I didn't know you had to do extra stuff. Because when I think of apps that sync over iCloud that are like I'm typing in one right now. I'm using the application Drafts, which is on all of the Apple platforms, and it does not expose any of your documents to the file system. So you just sort of interact only with your stuff when you're looking inside of the Drafts app. But you can check on iCloud in the settings, and then it'll keep everything nice and in sync. I just had assumed that was like sort of a completely separate way of you dealing with iCloud as a developer, but this is interesting. I'm learning new things.
Yeah, I imagine that the way that an app like Drafts works is that if it doesn't really expose its data as documents, as it were, then it's probably using core data or something, and then syncing that over iCloud. Because again, those kinds of cloud-enabled data models are there for exactly that kind of thing, reconciling the deltas between things that have changed in multiple places. And, Apple put a lot of really great work into doing that. And, maybe you could argue that given that we were, when we were starting Dorico back in 2012, 2013, we should have anticipated the need for this more, but we didn't. So we are playing with the cards that we've dealt ourselves now. And that means that some of that beautiful synchronization is at least for the time being out of reach, without us doing a lot of work. There are obviously alternative ways that we could go about doing it if we wanted to implement other ways of handling those kinds of transactional changes to the files and so on. But, is that something we're really going to do? I'm not sure. But as I say, I'm thinking about our near-term plans, and our near-term plans are really about smoothing the workflow of working with documents on multiple devices, whether that's multiple Apple devices or, a Windows laptop and your iPad or whatever it might be. And I think that we'll be able to do something that will make it a lot smoother without necessarily hitting the heights of pure Apple nirvana, but I think we'll get a lot closer than where we are today.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, that handoff feature is really nice, but I find myself using it much more often for things like I'm looking at a website on my phone, and my Mac is, I sit down at my desk, and then I can open that website with one click, that
Sure.
kind of thing. But I don't know. I'm trying to remember if I have ever even recently, done it with a kind of a document-based app. I mean, it's certainly nice. Well, the other thing that's coming hopefully soon to users that's speaking to this sort of Apple sort of what do they I'm trying to think what's the word that there's like a broader term, not handoff. Handoff is like a feature of this. Continuity, I think, is the
continuity. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, there's definitely, actually it's funny that because there's hopefully soon coming a feature that will let you just move your mouse and your keyboard. You'll be like on a Mac, and you'll kind of slide the cursor off the edge of your Mac, and if there's an iPad that's on nearby, it'll sort of like allow you to start manipulating the screen of the iOS device from the keyboard and the mouse of the Mac. And I have to say that there are times where I kind of like a workflow of having that, delegating like the computing power of like one app, particularly something like Dorico, to just the iPad, where it's like occupying the whole screen. I'm not doing lots of multitasking, and it's like this iPad is just doing this one thing. I actually kind of see myself in the future, because those are features that you can take advantage of without you doing anything at all. And I don't know, I'm kind of excited to like experiment with that a little bit. And I don't know, actually, now that I mention it, is that something that you've tried in practice? Is anyone running the latest Mac beta on the team? And
it's tricky because we can't, there's certain times of year when it makes sense to do it and certain times of year when it doesn't. Basically, we don't have enough Macs or indeed enough sacrificial iPads that we can always be running all the latest beta versions of stuff. But yeah, it is going to be very interesting. I haven't had a chance to try it myself yet, so I'm not sure whether or not it's going to work beautifully without us making any changes. It's really going to depend, how those synthesized touches come through. And I don't know the details, but it's definitely something we'll give a try as soon as we can either sacrifice a pair of Macs and iPads to on the beta altar. But yeah, I don't know exactly right now how that's going to work. So it'll be interesting to see. That's for sure.
Universal Control, I'm now remembering, is the name of it, and it's. Hopefully, I'm over the beta. I'm not gonna put any beta stuff on my computer right now. I'm just like in the middle of the school year, and I'm just buckling down and doing the work. I'm not I'm not currently playing, but yeah, it seems like a kind of a nice thing that could happen here. Before I forget, can I ask you, actually, can I sneak a file related feature request into this moment of the program?
Sure. Go for it.
All right. Actually, this might be I just don't know if I've checked recently. Is adding thumbnails of the contents of a Dorico project on the roadmap anywhere?
Yeah, so I mean, well, tell me what you mean.
Yeah, exactly. I guess I should clarify that. So I'm looking in the Files app. Actually, I'm in the Finder on my Mac, and I am looking at a PDF, and the PDF is not open. I just see the thumbnail image that it depicts to me when I'm looking at the files on my desktop, and I can actually see and very visually, like quickly, like find which document I'm looking for based on seeing the tiny little contents of the project inside of the thumbnail.
Yes. So on Mac they call that Quick Look, of course, and I guess there's probably an equivalent on iOS. Although I confess I haven't looked into it, but yes, I can tell you that one of the reasons why we have added, obviously in the hub view in both Dorico for iPad and Dorico on Mac OS and Windows, you now do get a thumbnail of the first page of whatever the layout was that you were last working on when you opened that project, shown in the hub, and we're saving those in the project. And Quick Look is an interesting technology because Apple require that you are able to show a preview for a document in less than 5 seconds, and if you don't manage it in less than 5 seconds, they shut you down. They actually kill the Quick Look importer, and that's why, for example, these days, for example, Sibelius, we wrote a Quick Look importer for Sibelius years and years ago when we were there, and in those days it was kind of okay because you could open a Sibelius file, even a relatively big one, in a few seconds, and I think Apple have maybe actually tightened that window. Maybe it was 10 seconds before and now it's 5 seconds or what have you. So what that used to do is it used to actually open it was basically like a little mini version of Sibelius running as a Quick Look plugin, and so it would be able to open the project and draw it as if it was Sibelius drawing it, and then draw you a page of music, and then as you'd scroll through the file it would then draw the other pages on demand like the Sibelius app does. But these days, and certainly with Dorico, we can't open a decent sized project in less than 5 seconds and then draw it. It's just not possible. The document is sufficiently complex that we can't do it. So if you want to support Quick Look these days, then the smart way to do it is actually to embed the preview into the document itself. And so that's what Dorico now does. Whether you save on iPad or on Mac or Windows, it saves both a PNG file of the first page and a PDF of the whole of the layout that you were working on when you save. It doesn't do it when you auto-save, but it does do it when you save. And so starting with the very next version of Dorico for macOS, we will have a Quick Look importer, so you will see, instead of a Dorico icon on your desktop or in the Finder, you'll see the first page of the score, and you'll be able to hit space on that, and it will bring it up into a quick look window, and you'll be able to scroll through that first layout, because it's effectively going to be showing you a multi-page PDF, just like it does for an actual PDF. And so hopefully people will find that helpful. And there probably is something equivalent to do that on the Files app on iOS, but we haven't looked into that yet. But we probably should, and I will talk to my colleague Graham about what might be needed to make that happen.
Cool. I'm glad I asked. That's great. Very cool. Okay. Awesome. Well, I'm learning tons of things. I guess I've got a handful of features, particularly Dorico 4 on the desktop, and then a couple of iPad things that I just maybe wanted to call out that are things that I really appreciate and am enjoying using. I guess, are there any things before I do that, are there any things you're most proud of, or that you like, that you would like music educators to know, things that maybe you feel like would fit into their workflow?
Yeah, I mean, probably there'll be some overlap with the things that I hope there'll be some overlap with the things that you've been enjoying using. But I think the thing that that has been most fun, and that I actually sort of just like mucking around with when I'm just sitting, like often I need to make a Dorico file as a bit of test data or something, and it's using the new rhythmic and melodic transformation features is really quite a lot of fun, and I hope that they'll be useful in educational settings as well. I know that again, teachers can sometimes have a bit of a mixed feelings about tools that can do things like rhythmic rotation or melodic transformation or scale transformation or what have you, because of course those are skills that you would like students to be able to do the hard way, so to speak. Right. But it's oh so fun and convenient to be able to use them, and so sort of beefing up the note tools pop over, the add intervals pop over as it used to be, the shift I pop over, so that it can not only build chords or transpose music, but also now do this complete set of transformations from rotation to retrograde to inversion to scale mapping to pitch mapping, all of them within a few key presses away. I think that's really tremendously good fun and really useful as well. And so that's something that a lot of effort went into for both, especially for Dorico 4, but obviously we've been able to bring it over to the iPad, effectively, very, very simply. I think those are really, again, it's all part of, for us, one of the things we really want Dorico to be able to lay claim to being, as well as being a great platform for producing, beautiful sheet music, is we would like it to be a good environment to try out ideas and to actually compose into. And so having those kinds of simple but very well integrated transformational tools kind of right there at your fingertips is hopefully the start of some further functionality that we'll add in that area. And I sort of put in the same category the feature to kind of create chord symbols based on the selected music as well. So again, maybe as a music educator we wouldn't be necessarily thrilled that students could kind of take some music and get an interpretation of a harmonic analysis, or an identification at least of what chords are at play there, but I think again that can be a super helpful thing as an arranging tool or as a prompt, or because you want to try something out on a different instrument, want to make a guitar part or whatever it might be. Those sorts of things can also be really handy. So it's great to be able to bring those across, and they're right there in the iPad version, although they are, I must point out, they are actually in the subscription version rather than in the free version. But yeah, they're there in the iPad version as well.
Yeah, I'm glad you clarified that these are really things that are available on both platforms. In fact, I'm looking at my list of favorites here, and yes, these are all things that are available on the iPad version as well. One of my favorites, I don't know if you consider this a deep cut or not. I really like that thing where you press the J key and then you get the like basically tell me what you want to do entry.
Yep, the jump bar.
The jump bar, absolutely. That's what you called it. And thank you for saying that, because I was trying to remember earlier today why it's the key is J. It's called the jump bar. That's
why is that? Yeah. It's called the jump bar, that's why. Yeah, I mean, there were very few single key shortcuts left on the Mac and Windows keyboards for new features like that. And yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where it's something that Anthony and I have talked about for years, actually. And sometimes users say, oh, what about a kind of universal popover that you could just type anything into? And the jump bar isn't that. But the thing that it's designed to sort of fill in is sort of we imagine that like the things you do every day in the software you will learn the keyboard shortcuts for, and the things that you'll do only very occasionally you will go hunting and pecking in the menus or the panels to find. But there's obviously across an application as deep as Dorico, which provides I don't know how many commands, 1,500 commands, I'm not sure, a lot. Then obviously there's a kind of huge sort of vista of commands in the middle that are maybe ones that you don't use all the time, but they're also something that you use somewhat frequently. And for those things, the jump bar is actually really handy. And in fact, even if you do know where that feature is, sometimes it's still quicker to just type a couple of letters into the jump bar to access it than it is to pick up your mouse or move your finger onto your trackpad and go grab it that way. So yes, as I say, it's something that we wanted for a long time. And we were, finally able to kind of just sort of sit down and knuckle down and get on with it. And it's also included in the iPad version. Right now, it's not accessible unless you've got a hardware keyboard. And we've certainly talked a bit about that, about whether or not actually it would make sense for there to be a button somewhere on the toolbar, say, if you use the tap, that could open the jump bar and bring up the on-screen keyboard so that you could use it even without a hardware keyboard. I'd be interested in your perspective on that, actually, whether you think that would be something that would be helpful.
Well, one of the things I like so much about the iPad version is that it, in many cases, just feels like I'm using the desktop version. So I often am leaving the Magic Keyboard attached. So I might not represent the masses. I think a lot of people do like to, rip it off the keyboard or don't even have keyboard and maybe would like it. I don't know. Could it fit on that right area underneath because you can kind of switch the popovers to that mode where you tap them rather than triggering them with a keyboard shortcut?
Yeah, I think we'd probably put it on the main toolbar rather than because it isn't really a thing for creating a notation, which is what all those things in the right hand panel are. But yeah, I mean, I think it would be an easy thing to add. It's just that I wasn't sure whether or not because it's a very keyboard focused feature, obviously the jump bar. But do iPad users, again, I'm lucky. I've got two iPads on my desk these days, actually. I've got an iPad mini, which I got last week because there are some interesting issues with using the iPad mini because it's the only iPad that doesn't have a 4:3 aspect ratio. And that introduces some interesting properties of how it works, actually, with Dorico. But my iPad Air that I got when we started working on the iPad version, I always have it with the Magic Keyboard, except for when it's propped up on top of my piano. And that is, that is otherwise on my desk, wherever I'm using it, it's got the Magic Keyboard attached. So it feels very natural to me to hit the J key, but maybe like you, maybe not everybody's fortunate enough to have a Magic Keyboard or even a Bluetooth keyboard that they're using with their iPad. And, maybe people are much better typists on screen than I am. I find I'm a much better, I've just about managed it on my phone, but obviously on the iPad, for whatever reason, it just feels weird with my big old thumbs.
Yeah.
But maybe people are, I'm sure people are really, really good at doing that. So
I'm pretty good at it myself. I could see myself wanting it when it is ripped off and on a music stand, but not often. But that one time that I would want it, I would really want it. Does it make sense? It's my
absolutely. Well, maybe we will find a place for it on the toolbar. As I say, it's not a difficult thing to add. It's just something that sort of felt like we had a bit of a philosophical question about whether or not that was really the way that a feature like that should be used. Because ideally, it's not like, for example, our friends and colleagues over at Avid who've kind of made a conscious decision to expose much of the functionality of their app only through that kind of interface, which I think has its pluses and its minuses. But obviously on the one hand, the jump bar would then allow you to access things that maybe don't have a spot in one of the contextual menus or in one of the panels or so on. But I think at the same time, I would not want the iPad version to be reliant on that as the means of accessing those features, because one of the big problems with a thing like the jump bar or command search, as they call it in Sibelius, is that you have to know what to type into it. And that's the same issue where that's exactly why, for example, Dorico can't rely purely on popovers, and why we also have to have panels for all of those things, because obviously as soon as you know how to use the popovers, it's massively quicker for you to use them than it is to open a panel and click on the thing and all the rest of it. But it would be pretty user hostile to only provide that as a means of accessing the functionality of the app. And so that's why it's kind of in this sort of grey area for me in terms of, I see it as a tool for people who already know what they want to do and they already know roughly what it's called even. And so that way they can access it quickly. But using it as a kind of first level of discoverability of the app, I think is a bit suspect. And so that's why it's sort of in this interesting place for us.
Yeah, there's a kind of user who does, appreciate seeing everything. What they see is what they think that the app can do. But then there is, I don't know, I personally, this implementation works for me because I'm going to take that extra time to find out where it is and what it can do for me. This is really like a growing, like this kind of feature is growing in popularity. I've noticed something I've been doing since around August is, I'm not sure how familiar you are with Obsidian, but this is a very popular cross-platform text editor that has it's built on Electron and is cross-platform and has this huge plugin architecture where people, like users, are like submitting, basically like adding to the app little bits that the user can go download, and it's just pointing to a folder of text files on your computer. So I'm kind of using it as like a notes and a writing tool. And one of its many appealing features is this exact same thing. I think it's Command P. Pretty courageous of them to map the print shortcut. But yeah, Command P, and they call it the command palette, I believe. And it's the same idea of trigger this shortcut and then just start typing the thing you want to do, and most likely it's there. And sure enough, it is. Like, I now delete documents by typing Command P, and then I just start typing the word delete, and before I can even get to the third letter, I can hit enter and then delete that document. And I don't know, to me, even though it's maybe like more steps or taps than using something like, in the case of Dorico, a popover, there's something like fluid about like just typing out what I want my computer to do. I feel like I really am just telling the computer, do this. I don't know.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. And incidentally, Command P is also the shortcut in one of the apps that I use every day for exactly the same thing, which is Visual Studio Code, which we use as one of our many development tools. It's also a text editor, of course. Effectively, I mean, it's a development environment, really. But I mean, it is, like you say, it's definitely kind of on vogue. It's funny, isn't it, that you kind of everything comes around again. Obviously, before we had the Mac, everybody did everything by typing into the computer. Obviously, you weren't typing plain English commands like apps allow you to do these days, but yeah, I mean, it's the idea that is as old as the keyboard, basically. But I think it is great to see a variety of different apps exposing their functionality in a variety of ways, because it obviously suits a lot of different working styles, and that's obviously to the good for everybody, because there are people with accessibility needs, for example, that means that having a pure text interface that can be driven by voice, for example, is something that's very handy. Also, people who can't use mice and trackpads or what have you for exactly the same reason. So yeah, I think it's obviously a great thing, but I think the important thing from our point of view is that it shouldn't be the only way of achieving some of these things, and so that sort of puts it in something like the jump bars in a slightly kind of special thing. I mean, certainly, yes, I probably would consider myself the same kind of user as you, Robby, in that I will both take the time to learn when there is a quick way to do something, because it'll save me time in the long run, and I'm also quite happy to poke around and sort of try and discover stuff by accident or by whatever it might be, sort of happenstance and good fortune, and then cling on to those things that I discover along the way. But I wouldn't want that to be the only way that somebody got to use and learn the things that we work on. So it has its place.
Sure, totally. Well, I want to tell you my other favorite thing, and we talked about it a lot back in July, and it is the key editor.
Indeed, yes, which we've continued to work on, and obviously the iPad version that just came out has now got a continuous controller editor, which is really nice. And yeah, I mean, it's been a big effort, that actually, and I think as is often the case with this kind of stuff, we sort of actually underestimated the amount of effort that it was going to take to really kind of get it looking and feeling fantastic on both iPad and on desktop. And that's an interesting case because, of course, it came to the iPad first. So actually then when we were coming to, and we were able, as I think we spoke about in July when we spoke about it, we were able to really lean on the expertise and the experience that our colleagues in the Cubasis team had already gained in building a really nice touch-first interface for editing MIDI data, and they really, really did nail that, I think, in Cubasis. So we borrowed pretty liberally from the sort of user experience decisions that they had made when we were then building the key editor component in Dorico. But then, of course, what we found is that as we brought it back to the desktop, quite a lot of those behaviors don't feel so good when you've got an input device with more modality. You know, with your finger, you can touch it, you can drag it, you can long press it, you can, you know, obviously there's a degree to which you can use multiple fingers, but again, I think that the difficulty with those sorts of gestures is they are hard to discover and they can be hard to remember. So we sort of tried to stick at least to the sort of more obvious ones. But then once you've got a mouse and you've got a trackpad and you can scroll with a wheel and you can use a right mouse button and a left mouse button and all the rest of it, then you've got that sort of richer interaction model. And we've had to, I mean, we're still, I think, even today, basically just putting in some more desktopification into that, you know. So it's been an interesting experience to go the other way, where obviously 90% of Dorico or more started life on the desktop, and so bringing it onto the iPad, we have to try to think about what kind of affordances we need to make for touch. But bringing the key editor back the other way has been quite an enlightening experience in terms of then translating something that we really, you know, because we couldn't really run it inside Big Dorico on the desktop at the time, we were very, and of course we were focused on the iPad version. That was absolutely the goal at that point. It wasn't to build a general purpose thing, not at that time. It was obviously the goal that it would become the general purpose thing. So yeah, it's been really interesting, and there's still a lot more work to do. The next Dorico update that's coming out as we record this, it'll be out in about a week's time. We'll have, you know, quite a good reworking of the mouse interaction and some other nice little bits and bobs for the key editor, and those, you know, many of those will apply on the iPad as well. But we've still got some missing bits and bobs, you know, like the tempo editor and the dynamics editor, for example, which people have been missing, which you know, we're always in that awkward situation where you never really want to bring out a new version of something and it have even in very limited way fewer features than the version that it's replacing. But that was actually in the end what happened with Dorico 4, because the old widgets based play mode that we'd been working with for the previous 5 years, you know, and I think maybe I've said this to you before as well, that, you know, that kind of started life as a prototype that ended up, you know, and sometimes this happens and it's never good, really. You sort of start down a road of like getting a prototype, like, oh yes, this is a way we could do this, but then, you know, the sort of realities of the schedule and all the rest of it meant that we ended up iterating on the prototype rather than really going away and re-engineering that from scratch. And that's what 2021 has allowed us to do, is to actually take that very, very important component, you know, in terms of the user interface of the application. It's, you know, 20% of the UI because it's one of the main 5 modes, but to actually take that and to really rework it from the ground up so that it, you know, is performant and it's using a much more modern framework, and it's, you know, over time it'll be able to benefit from, you know, proper graphics acceleration hardware and all this kind of stuff, and to sort of really make that as slick as we can, so that it's an investment in the future of the app. But the downside of that is that if it then takes longer than we wanted to get all those existing capabilities built back in, we're in the awkward position of asking users to use something with a few features missing. It's different on the iPad, of course, because those features weren't in. There was no iPad version, so it sort of doesn't matter. But on the desktop, we've definitely caused a little bit of pain with that. But I hope that, you know, obviously these kinds of transitions are not uncommon. Even Apple, for example, you know, when they changed Final Cut Pro and completely re-engineered that software, and, you know, obviously it was a period of a few years, I think, really, where it took a while for the new version to kind of develop the same feature parity that had been in the sort of classic version of Final Cut Pro. But, you know, in the end, the app is better for it, and I think users are happy, even though, you know, they didn't enjoy the experience of going through that short-term disruption and inconvenience. I think that in the longer term, the investment really pays off, and it doesn't only pay off for us in terms of making it easier to build the thing, but I think it really does pay off in terms of making the app feel more fluid. And I think that users are already finding that, although, you know, I mean, it really has, for a lot of people, including for myself, I must say, transformed the way that they use the application. And that is, that is a sign that, okay, it may not be complete, but we're definitely moving in the right direction with that feature now.
Well, it's just exciting to see how fast now that these two different versions of the program can like move in step with one another. Because now, I think when you take this time to sort of to stack that all up, I would imagine that there's a lot of like now like newer stuff that you all are looking forward to adding to all versions of Dorico. Like for example, Open in Place, which is for me an exciting one.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think that we've obviously got we'll be working on Dorico 4 and the sort of Dorico 2 in inverted commas version for the iPad for the next little while. But one of the things that is both good and bad is that I can't ever see us really running short of ways that we can improve either the capability of the app or the workflow of the app or the user experience of the app. There's literally endless scope for it, and we've got a pretty decent. It's a bit sort of somewhat movable, the roadmap that we have ahead of us, but we've got 2 big projects to work on this year. Beyond Dorico 4 and the iPad stuff that we're working on at the moment. And I'm excited for us to be able to kind of tackle them. But I hope that we'll be able to continue to, deliver incremental updates to Dorico 4 and Dorico for iPad, really for a good portion of this year, really. And we certainly don't want to get in the situation we were in last year where, between February of 2021 and January of 2022, users of Dorico on the desktop, for example, didn't get any bug fixes, and that's something that we definitely want to avoid. And we'll keep, as like you say, Robby, we'll try and keep the 2 apps, the desktop app and the mobile app. We'll try and kind of keep them moving as close together as we possibly can.
Yeah, that's exciting. It's so clearly the way that software development is moving, and it's exciting that an application that's so specific to what I do in my profession is getting that treatment, and you can see it happening. And all these, we talked about this back in the summer, but you see it happening with things like Obsidian, which is this like sort of Electron is different than what you're building with, but it's like again, it's like this cross-platform sort of like web technology based way of sort of making an app that can be on every platform. And then you've got things like Apple's like Swift UI and Catalyst, which are ways for people to make iOS apps that can run on the Mac. And I'm looking right here on my desktop. Fourscore is running on my Mac, and I'm super happy to use apps like that had like real obvious use cases on the iPad, which I can put on a music stand, but now I'm like doing all of my file management of my scores on the Mac, where I just feel a little more comfortable dealing with lots and lots of documents. So I'm looking at my docs, some of my other music apps here, and I'm grateful that you all are doing this work, because I see a couple of other icons on my dock of some frequently used professional music apps, some of which made by the maker of the platform that do not have an iOS version. So yeah, I think this is the way things are going. And yeah, it's great. Like, where is Logic on my iPad? That's what I want. And Final Cut.
You've got GarageBand. You've got iMovie.
Yes.
I mean, they're pretty good apps, to be fair.
They are really good apps.
They're not Logic or Final Cut.
Yeah, I would be okay with. Well, here's my thing. This is I'm really gonna just go off the deep end here, but I'm curious. Maybe you can. I like people who are like really like in this space to sort of take my big dream ideas and like kind of knock them down a couple of pegs. So I would love to believe that there is a potential future where something like Logic can exist on iOS, and then Apple can take what they've done with audio units system of like plugins and have some sort of story about how a developer of an audio plugin could make something that could work cross-platform on a Mac and on an iPad.
It does not seem far-fetched to me at all. Because particularly these days, obviously, as we know, the fact that the system architecture between Macs and iPads is increasingly similar rather than dissimilar. I think it's certainly not a case of there isn't enough grunt or horsepower on both platforms to accommodate those sorts of workflows. So, I think it's just a question of really, I think with Apple, I mean, this is again my sort of speculation and Kremlinology, sort of looking at the things that they do rather than what they say, because they almost never say anything. But I think they obviously have some clear ideas about what use cases are important to do in a cross-platform way and which ones are not. But I think they're also, because they're also I think deeply an incremental company every year. Obviously we look at the difference between the iPhone of 2022 and the iPhone of 2007, and they're almost unrecognizable, but not quite. And that's 15 years, 16 years, whatever, nearly of incremental improvement. But the net result, of course, is complete revolution in that time. So I think it can be hard to kind of read the tea leaves and sort of guess what they might do, but it doesn't seem far-fetched to me at all that those sorts of things could be possible. So yeah, I think we'll wait and see what happens.
Yeah, good. Well, you inspired me then, instead of knocking me down. I appreciate that.
I'll encourage you rather than knocking you down. Yeah, I think, well, we dream big, for goodness sakes. I mean, the very fact that in 2010, the fact that that first iPad was almost as much of a kind of revolutionary sort of experience of seeing that for the first time, and for it to really work, coming only 2 or 3 years after the iPhone, and now look at what the iPad has done to desktop computing, and I think it's not crazy at all to think that we could be headed in that kind of direction.
Yeah, well, I am excited that that my music notation software certainly is. I got one thing for you in just this iPad, this recent Dorico 2 iPad release. I wanted to ask you about, and then I'll if there's other things you want to say, we can do that, and I thought maybe we could move on to some segmented sections of the show, some app, album, and tech tips of the week. So my Dorico 2 thing is that I think and this is certainly what I think jumped out to most people in the release notes, is the Apple Pencil edition in the read mode, and I guess. I mean, it works exactly as I would expect it to. It's very, very convenient to be able to take something that I'm editing and working with it, and writing, and then just sort of instantly flip it over into a mode where I can draw on it freehand. That's an exceptionally awesome thing. But you sort of hinted at earlier that you're also looking at other ways that the Apple Pencil gets involved. So I'm wondering, as this feature where you can write on the screen with the Apple Pencil was developed, did that kind of give any hints to the team as to did it clarify any future vision for what an Apple Pencil would or would not be able to do in the actual writing of music?
Well, I still stick to my guns that I actually think the Apple Pencil is not a great input device for symbolic music. I think that it's just, even though it's extremely natural for graphical input of music, it isn't very good for symbolic input of music. It's because you have to be very precise, and it's very difficult for the computer to interpret what you're doing accurately and so on. So it hasn't really changed my mind that I don't think you should expect us to be adding sort of staff pad style handwriting input anytime soon. I just don't think, even if we could get that working super reliably, even as reliably as staff pad, which is for me at least, maybe as a lefty, I find it a bit tricky to get the results that I would like first time or second time out of it. But I think that it doesn't necessarily make sense there, and I also think it's interesting what the guys at Avid have done in terms of using its tilt and sensitivity stuff in a way. But I find that also personally, I find that quite awkward and little painful actually, to try and input music that way. So I think that where the Apple Pencil is best is when it's used as a writing device, basically. And so I think that or as a very precise pointer. That's the other thing that it can be used for, I think, naturally, without kind of stretching the idiom to beyond breaking point. So I think that that's where we are focused. I think it was certainly very interesting from a technical point of view, implementing the annotations in read mode, partly because, again, we can't take advantage of Apple's really super duper APIs directly. We're sort of painting the whole way through the letterbox of using Qt, which obviously is tremendous in so many ways. It allows us to develop the app across 3 platforms with a very small team, in a way that we couldn't have dreamed of, sort of 10 years ago or whatever. So it is tremendously great that we can use it. But it does mean that we don't get access to all of the wonderful super duper things that the pencil can do if you're using Apple's native sort of inking UIs, APIs rather. So, it tells us a lot about what we might want to do in future. There are some technical things that we're going to need to address in terms of being able to... So we were able to kind of sidestep some issues by having it be a special mode, basically, that you go into where we could know that the things that we're receiving as events from the pencil should be interpreted in a certain way, and we don't need to worry about any kind of ambiguity about what the user might be meaning with the pencil. But if we were to do that more generally when you're not in that special mode, then for technical reasons, we've got some issues about, working out exactly what you might be meaning. And so we will address those as we can. Partly that involves us upgrading to a newer version of Qt, and then also reworking some of our interaction code to make use of some changes in there. So it doesn't change anything fundamentally, I don't think. As I say, I don't think the pencil as a music notation input device, I just can't see it being more efficient or even halfway as efficient as just, tapping the key or the drum pad or the fret of the thing that you actually want to input on the staff, and even indeed being able to play multiple notes in simultaneously and all this kind of thing. But I think there are obviously plenty of ways that you could use the pencil that play to its strengths, and yeah, we have plenty of ideas, but because it's not something that we can work on right this minute, it's probably best that I keep my powder dry on what some of those things might end up being in the future.
Yeah, cool. Well, I'm interested certainly to see it develop. Yeah, I don't know the answers myself, but I definitely there certainly are times where I can think to myself like, yeah, the pencil, right? Right. It's that I agree with you that it is that it's kind of like the mouse is like a very refined selection and manipulation tool on a desktop machine, and the Apple Pencil seems to sort of fill that role on iOS. But yeah, again, it's like it really does open up so many questions that have to be reckoned with.
Indeed. Yep, agreed.
Totally. Well, okay, before we move on, is there anything else you want to say about Dorico 4 for the desktop, Dorico 2 for the iPad, licensing, the future, anything you want to tease? I don't know, anything. The floor is yours.
Sure. Well, I suppose I will say that I hope that your listeners will check Dorico 4 out if they haven't done already, and the iPad version. You can try, on the desktop, there's a free version of Dorico called Dorico SE, which you can just go and download. You go to dorico.com/SE. You can use that. That will work forever. That allows you to write for up to 2 instruments, and it has 90% of the features of Dorico Pro. It's just that it's limited in terms of how many instruments you can write for. There's also, of course, trial versions of Dorico Pro and Dorico Elements that you can grab. You can just go to dorico.com and you'll find one button to buy and one button to try, so I definitely recommend you do that too. And Dorico for iPad, of course, you can just find it by searching for it on the App Store, and it is a free app. There is an in-app purchase subscription option which unlocks additional functionality, but again, just like Dorico SE on the desktop, we have tried to make Dorico for iPad a genuinely useful app without you needing to spend any money at all. But if you do decide to subscribe, it's $4 a month or $40 a year, so it's really not going to break the bank, and you'll get a lot of value for that, and a decent set of updates coming in the coming months. Just on the licensing thing, because I think we can't really shout loudly enough about it. It doesn't really affect the iPad version, of course, because on the iPad you can run Dorico on any iPad that your Apple ID is signed into. Although one thing I will say is that Dorico for iPad 2, if you choose subscribe, now that subscription is eligible for family sharing. So if you have multiple devices in your household with different Apple IDs that are all part of the same family group, you only need to buy one subscription for all of the iPads that are in your family group. So that's a nice benefit that we've added, and indeed the subscriptions now will start with an introductory offer, so you can try out the full features of the app for a week in the case of a monthly subscription, or a month in the case of an annual subscription. So we'll hope people will take advantage of those things. But just on the subject of licensing on the desktop, obviously for years, Steinberg products have been famous for using dongles, and Dorico has never needed the dongle, although, in the sort of popular mind, I think people just associate Steinberg products with USB e-licenses and so on. But we are in the middle of a transition away from the USB e-licenser and indeed the e-licenser system altogether towards a new system, and Dorico 4, which came out just less than 2 months ago as we have our chat today, was the first product to use Steinberg licensing, and it's really great. Basically, it makes the managing the software so much easier. You basically simply sign in with your Steinberg ID, which is the email address and password that you set up on our website, and then you can run the app on up to 3 computers without deactivating it. So, if you've got a machine at home, a machine at school, and a machine that you carry back and forth or take with you to rehearsals, what have you, then you don't need to carry any dongles or anything. You can simply run the software on all of those machines without deactivating it. And if you do need to deactivate it, it's literally one click in a new Steinberg Activation Manager software that we've built, and then you can go onto another machine, and there's no limit to how often you can activate and deactivate on different machines. It's designed to be really, really straightforward and easy, and I hope that people who maybe were interested in Dorico in the past, but particularly if they're used to using Finale and Sibelius, which have always had slightly more permissive, well, certainly not always, but for a long time, certainly as long as Dorico has been around, and a long time before that, they have had more permissive licensing schemes than Dorico had. Dorico basically was you lock it to one computer or you lock it to a USB e-licenser, which means that you can run it on any computer that the e-licenser is connected to, whereas both Sibelius and Finale have basically always allowed you to run on at least 2 machines, and certainly they provide flexibility. And for a lot of people who might be interested in Dorico, that was a deal breaker, but I want everybody to know now that is no longer a deal breaker. Dorico's licensing is now at least as easy as Sibelius's and Finale's, and Steinberg products across the board will be transitioning to that over the coming months and probably small number of years, but Dorico is right there already. And the only thing that is missing as I speak to you today, Robby, is that we don't have a great solution for large-scale multi-user licenses inside schools and other institutions, but we're working on that next. Cubase is coming out very soon, and that will involve a little bit more work on what we call the air-gapped activation case, where the machine that you want to use the software on isn't itself connected to the internet, so we're working on that next. But straight after that, it's going to be proper support for multi-user licensing, which will hopefully accelerate Dorico's adoption in schools and universities, and indeed other Steinberg products as well. So it's a big effort. The company is committed to it. There's been a lot of work from people across the business, and indeed several members of the Dorico team have played a big part in it. And yeah, if people have been put off from using Dorico in the past because of what they perceive to be restrictive licensing, I really hope they'll take a minute to go and check out Dorico 4, because it's a very different story now.
Yeah, licensing is a pain point for most people who are familiar with professional creative software, but everything about this new licensing system makes it easier. I don't have enough good things to say about it. It's great. A+.
Great. Glad to hear
Yeah.
that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Very good. That's a good grade. I'll take that.
Nice. Okay. Well, anything else before we move on to some segments?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Yeah. I appreciate all of the information you gave. I have learned a lot. And yeah, okay, I'll jump straight into it. I have curated an album, app, and tech tip of the week that are related to one another. That was not necessary for your preparation.
Good. They're not related to one another.
That's fine.
But I do have one. I have a suggestion in each category, actually. Yes.
Great. If we can, I feel like since I have some continuity here, maybe it'd be best if we do album first, just because my album will set the stage for my app and my tech tip of the week.
Cool. Let's hear it.
Okay. So I am reading a book that was like going around. It was just buzz. Everyone was buzzing about it on Twitter. It's a book called Dilla Time, and it is about the hip hop producer Jay Dilla and his influence on recorded music, particularly the feel of how drum machines and samples articulate certain kinds of rhythm. And the book is really good. It's actually very, very it goes down real easy. Like, it's not a super dense book, but it does cover. It's somewhat autobiographical. I'm sorry, not autobiographical. Somewhat biographical about Jay Dilla's life, but also pulling in like lots of music technological advancements, things like giving the history of different like brands of drum machines that were influential to popular music, and like synthesizer development, and like specifically how he as a producer was sort of bending them to his will and using them kind of like instruments before anyone else was. And I guess the underlying sort of thesis of the book is that he pioneered this kind of timing where the hi-hat and the bass drum sort of have feels that don't necessarily fit precisely into a straight or a swing time, but more so have sort of like an unevenness to them, and then having the snare drum backbeat be sort of like slightly earlier than where you would expect it, and the bass drum sometimes sitting back behind the beat, and how this influence has sort of like just become like sort of something that's not only common in hip hop but in tons of other popular music styles, that we you can't not engage with. So I don't know, it's a pretty interesting book. So my album is I'm in the part of the book that's sort of like really breaking into his like early producing career and rise, and Slum Village is a rap group that he was in, and they did 2 albums, Fan-Tas-Tic Volume 1 and Volume 2, and those are just really good albums for demonstrating this kind of sampling and drumming and producing style. And I'm digging into them. I think it's very cool. This kind of drumming style has influenced everyone from lots of hip hop producers after him, but also has influenced lots of jazz musicians like Robert Glasper, and I know like Snarky Puppy is very popular with a lot of musicians and teachers that I know, so I assume that they're on my listeners' radar. That drumming style of just sort of like, not swing, not straight, sort of both at the same time, yet neither. I don't know. It's an interesting book. And I guess it's a bonus book recommendation as well as an album pick of the week.
It does sound like it, yeah. Wow. That sounds very interesting. I will have to take a listen to Slum Village. I don't know them. I'm not big into hip hop. Perhaps it won't be surprising to know that this middle class white bloke from England isn't big in his hip hop, but I'll definitely check it out. I'm certainly always interested in new stuff.
Well, let me give a bonus. There's actually I don't know about any of the other streaming platforms, but Apple Music is what I have discovered this on. There's like a handful of kind of like introduction to an artist kinds of playlists, and they're made, they're not like user submitted or like AI submitted. They're actually people who are on the staff who curate these and like do a write up about like kind of the there's sort of like a line that you can trace through the different songs on the playlist. And so there's like a handful of Jay Dilla essentials, as well as like here's a playlist of songs that artists that he influenced, and so you can kind of get the broad strokes without diving full on into like late 90s hip hop.
Very cool. Yeah, we'll check it out. So my album pick is a soundtrack album, actually, because I have been completely obsessed since it came out about a week ago, or just over, I suppose, a week and a half ago now, with the new game Horizon Forbidden West on the PlayStation 5. It's the sequel to a game that came out in 2017, although it was really a discovery for me in the pandemic, actually. I hadn't played it, and then I picked it up in 2020 and became obsessed with it and its score. And it's a really, really tremendous orchestral and all sorts of interesting electronic, mixing together. The main composer is Joris de Man, but there's also Alexa Lozochuk. I cannot say that name. Alexa Lozochuk, and also The Flight, which is a pair of composers, have all contributed to the soundtrack. And it's really, really great. There's a mixture of really epic sort of cinematic stuff. There's also some very atmospheric music as well. I find it very handy to listen to when I'm working, because I can sort of experience it in that sort of background way, but also it's the kind of music that also rewards a bit more careful listening. There's some really interesting thematic development, building on the first game in this album as well. I understand there's actually going to be 3 volumes of soundtrack for this, and they released the first one last Friday. And yeah, it's tremendous, and I love the game. I've probably put more time into that over the last week than I should have done, given everything we're working on at work at the moment. But it's a great game and a really, really great score, and I would definitely recommend people check it out.
You're the second person in the past few weeks who has recommended this game. We own the first one and just have simply not, like, it was, a couple bucks on the PlayStation Store a couple months ago, and we just haven't gotten around to it. But I hear nothing but...
You need to play it. I think the narrative design... I mean, the whole game is, I think, a real... a masterpiece is a big word, but I really feel like in terms of environmental storytelling, narrative design, satisfying game mechanic, incredible world building and beautiful visuals, and a really, really knockout score and sound design. Actually, the sound design is also incredibly good, even taking the music aside. I really think it's a really special piece of work, and the sequel is just as special. And also, I haven't completed the story yet, so I don't know where it goes, but boy oh boy, narratively it goes places, and it really is tremendous. And I fell in love with the game from practically the first minute I played it, and I was deeply regretful that I hadn't played it sooner, given that I could have played it 2 or 3 years earlier than I did. And the music has been, ever since I played it in 2020, that music has been on hard rotation, and the sequel soundtrack will be as well for me. So you should definitely check it out. I know these games that are big story-driven single-player games, they are a big investment of time, but I really believe that that they definitely repay you the time that you put in. These particular two, anyway, I think they're tremendous.
Okay, that's a hard sell. That's great. Those kinds of games are precisely the reason we own a PlayStation, and they're also the hardest kinds of games for me to find time for, especially because my wife and I our common time is more often when it's spent playing video games. It's things like Mario and Yoshi's Crafted World, like just very like the day is over and we just really are not gonna commit kinds of experiences. But that's cool. I'm curious, do you know of any people who are doing game composing who are using Dorico?
Well, as it happens, some of the music in the 2 Horizon games was done using Steinberg products, including both Dorico and Cubase. Also, the video game composer Olivier de Rivière was also using Dorico quite a bit. He's done a lot of games, including Innocence: A Plague Tale. He did the vampire game. It was spelt vampire with a Y, and many others. He's done a lot. I'm sure I'm forgetting. Actually, he did a very big game very recently, which I think I'm forgetting the name of. But he is a Dorico user and enjoys it a lot. So yeah, I mean, we obviously are very delighted when people who are in these kind of really big and exciting projects are using Dorico, and we're fortunate to have some people in the video game world who are using Dorico, as of course Cubase and Nuendo are sort of de rigueur in that field, but it's great to see Dorico being used for some of these things as well. Yeah,
awesome. Okay, well, my app of the week is related, and it's not something I have to really explain a lot of. It's just something that I'm going to highlight here. Most people probably have tried the Audible app. I am trying to listen to less podcasts in my life right now and do more reading. And this is actually, I'm just going to glue this straight to my tech tip. There's this cool feature in the Audible app where you can, like, certain select books, if you own the Kindle purchase, you can sync your place in the book between the Kindle version and then the audio version. And in fact, you can even play the Audible recording from within the Kindle app. But there's like a little play button will appear at the bottom of the text of the page you're reading, and so that's my tech tip. It's called Whispersync is the name of the feature that they gave that, and so I have been catching up on my hopelessly long list of, because the way that they get you with Audible is they're like, here, get this credit for $15, yep. and then I forget to cancel it, and then all of a sudden I'm like, I've got to cancel Audible, and so I do, but then I have to cash out. And so I buy lots of books. And so I'm actually trying to, spend at least a handful of my the hours of my commute time in doing the dishes time throughout the week, just, doing a book instead. So that's my recommended app and feature of that app.
Yeah, I think Whispersync is great. I mean, I remember when we first got... I mean, Whispersync was originally the name of the feature just that would sync it between your computer and your hardware Kindle before there was even a Kindle app, you know. But it's great that it now works not only across the cloud reader and across your hardware Kindle if you still have one, but also your mobile device and Audible as well. It's pretty cool. So, yes, I would second that. Well, my app of the week is actually a Mac app, which is kind of a cheat, I know, but it's an app called Raycast, and we were talking at great length earlier on about the jump bar in Dorico and about similar features in Obsidian and Visual Studio Code and so on. Well, Raycast is kind of like that, but it's sort of like a Spotlight replacement basically for the Mac. So you can set it to actually replace Spotlight, which I have done on my computer, and like Obsidian, say, that has all these abilities to have plugins that are provided by the community. There's a little store built into Raycast, so you can basically expand. I mean, I use Spotlight primarily as a calculator for unit conversion and for app launching, and Raycast can do all of those things, but it can also do a whole bunch of other stuff, like it can directly manage processes on your Mac, and you can create GitHub issues from it, and you can do all sorts of really interesting things with it. And again, it's got an open plugin architecture. I haven't tried to develop anything for it myself or anything like that, but I think it's really quite cool. And the fact that you can, you know, go into, say, I mean, the thing that I find a bit that I never kind of really loved about Spotlight was the way the file search works, and you know, there was always this compromise between Spotlight doing it basically based on pretty much only name, although there were ways of making it do it based on kind as well, or you could do it in the Finder, which was a bit better, but even that's not amazing in terms of like actually learning how to get it to do it based on file type rather than just file name or what have you. And Raycast kind of just has a nice thing where you can type FS and that puts it into file search mode, and then you get really quite a good flexible file search that I think is leveraging Spotlight as well. So it returns things that Spotlight would return, but also it can return file names much more reliably in my experience than Spotlight does. So I've really been enjoying that. I've only been using it a couple of weeks, and I feel like there's a lot of things that I can still dig into more in there. But it's been really good, and I would definitely recommend it. It's free to download, and I think it's worth checking out.
You're going to make me try this. I've been resisting this app primarily because I own both Launchbar and Alfred, which are similarly like competitors to the Spotlight.
Yes.
And I am really invested in Alfred, and so I don't know if I can see something else sticking at this point. However, I'm a member of a publication called Club MacStories, which is just, you know, they have tons of free content on just MacStories.net. But one of their sort of like member only posts recently was like a deep dive into Raycast and why it is compelling. And I've been avoiding reading it for this exact reason because I don't want to download another thing and go down the rabbit hole. But now I think I'm going to have to at least see what it's about.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think I sort of tried both Launchbar and Alfred at various points and kind of bounced off them. They didn't really stick with me. I'm not sure why, but I've found Raycast to be compelling enough to leave it instead of Spotlight. And I'm only doing very simple things with it, but I've been enjoying the capabilities that it has, and just learning a few little tips that you can use. And it's got a very nice sort of built-in onboarding and tutorial system as well, which I really quite like, that it sort of offers you a nice sort of slope onto understanding some of the things that it does when you first run it. I've been enjoying it. I think it's good, and I think it's at least worth checking out. But don't know if it's going to unstick either of those other two apps for you, but it's certainly unstuck Spotlight for me.
Okay, well, it's going on my to-do list here.
And the final thing, so my tech tip this is a bit of a cheat really, but my tech tip is actually about Pi-hole. I don't know whether you're familiar with Pi-hole, but it's actually 10 years since the Raspberry Pi was first released now, the Raspberry Pi being the little single board computer that was made by folks sort of in partnership with Cambridge University and so on, and they've sold now 40 million Raspberry Pi computers around the world in the 10 years. I think it's now certainly the most successful computer to ever come out of Britain, and it's actually made here in Britain as well. It's made in Wales, and it may be, as a family of computers, of a specific manufacturer computer. It might be like one of the very best-selling computers of all time, and they can of course do everything. I've got about 4 in the house. I use them for all sorts of things. But the particular thing that I find it Pi-hole especially good for is Pi-hole is basically a network-wide ad blocking and content management thing for your network. So you basically install it onto an SD card. It takes about 10 minutes. You plug it into your network, and then you'd set your computers to use the Pi-hole as their gateway and their DNS server, and that's it. And then you've got network-wide ad blocking, and also some tracking protection as well, and the ability to very easily and very nicely, flexibly filter out content that you don't want to get onto your network. I've got kids, so there's certain things that I don't want them to be able to look up on the internet and so on. And obviously the router that we've got here at home has some features for that kind of stuff, but something like Pi-hole makes it really, really easy to configure specific things that we do or don't want. And because the Raspberry Pi is such a low power device, it barely costs anything to run, and it is able to provide a really, really good quality of content filtering for all of the devices, whether they're phones, whether they're computers, whether they're iPads, on our home network. And it's completely free, and I think it's a really tremendous thing. You can buy a Raspberry Pi for less than $50. Pi-hole itself is free. It's a really tremendous thing, and I recommend it wholeheartedly.
I'm looking it up a little bit here. This is pretty. I don't expect this kind of user interface from something like this.
Yeah, it's really well put together, and quite mature and quite efficient, and you can look up all sorts of interesting things about what actual kind of tracking requests and content blocking requests are being handled by it and so on. And we had a little bit of fun and games with one of our smart TVs. It wouldn't allow us to, because smart TVs of course are one of the most privacy invading internet connected devices you could possibly imagine, and we did have a little bit of fun and games with one of the Samsung TVs in the house. In order to get it working nicely, we had to kind of bypass the Pi-hole because we just could not get it to sign into various services without it. But on all of our on 2 of our 3 smart TVs, it works perfectly without any problems. And for all of our computers and phones, there's 4 of us in the house, but it feels like we each have about 10 devices or something insane, all things considered, once you've got Alexas and phones and computers and games consoles and so on all over the place. So it's great. It works beautifully. Never needs to be sort of mucked around with. It's very easy to upgrade. I just upgraded mine yesterday, for example, because I spotted that it had an upgrade, or that it had been happily churning away, dealing with hundreds of thousands of requests for a long time, and it's just simply set and forget. And definitely, you could spend a lot of money on these sorts of devices to plug into your local network, or pay a service provider to do it, or what have you. Pi-hole, I think, is easily the equal of any sort of expensive content filtering device that you could plug into your network. And as I say, you can set it up on a device. It doesn't even have to be one of the more powerful Raspberry Pis, because it's just simply network filtering. Can't recommend it enough. I think it's tremendous.
Awesome. Yeah, my last Raspberry Pi project was building a smart mirror, and I regret to say that I have not finished setting the software up. So Dustin, if you were listening, I'm sorry. He's a friend of mine who helped me build the casing for the mirror, and even actually finished it recently and gave it to me as a gift. It's beautiful. It's ready to go. I just need to. I'm kind of waffling between, do I want to use an old Apple TV where you can jailbreak it, and then there's some pre-made apps people make for this kind of thing, or do I want to go the Raspberry Pi route? The Raspberry Pi route is probably the correct one. I gotta finish that.
Well, I mean, the nice thing about Pi-hole is that you can also run it on a device that does something else.
Right.
So it's it could both be your smart mirror and it could be your Pi-hole.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I gotta figure this out. This whole I have a Mac Mini that's always running, and I'm rethinking its place in my life. But at a certain point, I think I'm eventually gonna break and do some network attached storage in our house. We moved a few years ago, and there's room to set up some stuff. I also want to I'm thinking about building a PC again this summer. I haven't done that in about 10 years, and there's a lot of games that seem fun that have come out since then. So
Yes, I rebuilt my own PC 2 summers ago so that I could play Flight Sim, which I probably have really in total managed to spend maybe, I don't know, a dozen hours really playing, and it probably took me half that long to build the PC.
That's true.
But it's nice being able to run it and get a decent frame rate. Obviously I wasn't able to get one of the super duper graphics cards because you can't buy them, but I was able to get a decent one that could give me pretty semi-decent performance on a game like that. So, and in fact I replayed Horizon Zero Dawn, having played it originally on PlayStation 4. I played it again at the end of last year as a kind of break from the stress of the Dorico 4 sort of crunch. I played Horizon again on PC, and it was brilliant being able to play it in 4K at 60 frames per second on the graphics card that I'd got ostensibly to play Flight Sim. So I enjoyed that game twice over in the last couple of years, and again, really, really recommend that one.
Okay, I'm hyped to play this game now. You really sold it. Well, Daniel, thank you so much for joining the show. I'm going to link tons of stuff in the notes to the episode. Everything from links to previous episodes of the show you've been on, but also where people can learn more about Dorico 4, Dorico 2 for iPad, licensing. There's a lot of great videos on your website that have, really, really just like expertly crafted visual descriptions of like a lot of these new features, and so I'll link those. So yeah, thanks again for coming on, and hope to see you again soon.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you for having me, and it's always fun to chat.
All right, I'm Robby Burns. Thanks for listening to Music Ed Tech Talk. You can find the show's page, show notes for this episode, and my blog at musicedtechtalk.com. You can subscribe to blog posts through an RSS app of your choice, and you can subscribe to the podcast in a podcast app of your choice. You can now get blog posts delivered right into your email inbox once a week. Please rate and review the show in the podcast app you use. It absolutely helps. It'll only take a second and a few taps. Word of mouth is helpful too, so please spread the word about the show. You can learn more about my teaching and music career at robbyburns.com. I'm on Twitter, Facebook, Twitch, and YouTube at Robby Burns. Please consider supporting me on Patreon at patreon.com/musicedtechtalk. All support tiers get perks, but even the base tier gets you a monthly video update with app and music recommendations and tech tips, and access to the Music Ed Tech Talk Discord community, where you can chat with other supporters and guests of the show about music, apps, pedagogy, lesson ideas, tech support, and more. It's a fun place to be. All right, and we'll see you next time.